Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This is episode number 48 of the Sports Spectrum Podcast. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Romano. It is wonderful to have you joining us here on the program today. As always, you can find our podcasts on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are found. The best way to make sure you never miss an episode is click that subscribe button when you go to your phone or your tablet and you're checking out the podcast. Click subscribe. That allows you to become a subscriber, of course, but to never miss an episode. And we've been releasing 1 to 2 episodes a week, each week on these podcasts. So definitely click the subscribe button. That'll make sure you never miss it. And also download the podcast as well. You can listen to it when you don't have that Wi-Fi or that data roaming going, and allows you to listen to the podcast wherever you are. And as always, all of our content, all of the podcasts, we have daily articles and different type of stories that you'll find on athletes and the intersection of faith and sports, and they are all available at sportspectrum.com. So do check that website out. And when you click there, consider partnering with us. Consider becoming a member of the Sports Spectrum family. It's just $36 for an entire year, which is basically the equivalent of $3 a month. You know, many of us spend $3 a day on a cup of coffee. So for $3 a month, for $36 for 1 year, you can become a member of the Sports Spectrum family, which allows you to receive our magazine, our quarterly magazine, which is really wonderfully done. We have a whole new staff now that's putting together the magazine and doing a wonderful job. And you also help fund all of the different content that we're doing here as part of the Sports Spectrum ministry, including the podcast, including the daily content on sportspectrum.com. So consider partnering with us, $36 for an entire year. It's a great idea, by the way, for a birthday present or a Christmas present, something like that, for the parents or the grandparents to give to their kids or their nephews or their nieces, maybe a youth group, a pastor, subscribing and giving the magazine to his youth group, something like that. So just consider partnering with us. We would love to have you on board with all that we're doing here. Very exciting times with Sports Spectrum and sportspectrum.com. All right, today's guest on episode number 48 is Jordan Rogers. About 3 or 4 months ago, I got an email from a friend of mine who was listening to our podcast. And as always, we encourage you to send emails to us. Jason@sportspectrum.com is my email. And send an email and let us know if you have any ideas for guests or even a connection to a guest, because a lot of this is really through different people knowing other people. And that's exactly how this podcast today came about. I got an email from a friend of mine who said, "Hey, have you considered having Jordan Rogers on your podcast?" And I said, "Jordan Rogers, why do I know that name?" And I remembered with Jordan that I had watched his video at iamsecond.com about his story. And it was about 10 or 11 minutes long. And it really was a powerfully motivating and inspiring video from Jordan about the life of drugs and the life of addiction that he lived, and how God sort of grabbed a hold of him and saved him and rescued him out of that. And I thought, yeah, I definitely want to talk to Jordan, because we can go a little deeper here in this podcast than sort of a 10-minute video. And that's exactly what we do with Jordan. His story is incredible. From where this guy is now compared to where he was before is night and day. And he's an inspiration to me. He loves sports, and he works for Nike, so I hope he loves sports, but he works for Nike, and he's doing wonderful with his job now. But a lot of this podcast, most of this podcast, is not about his time at Nike. It's about the unbelievable redemption story and sort of the pit of darkness that this guy was in and has been rescued out of it. So excited to have you here, episode number 48 of the podcast. Without further ado, here he is, our conversation with Jordan Rogers, Nike's North American brand manager, right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Jordan, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much, man. Happy to be here.
It's great to hear from you. Now, I discovered you from a friend, an introduction from a friend who pointed me to the I Am Second video that you recorded with that group, and they do wonderful work in 2016. And there's so much to unpack. I think even we can go even further than what was in that video, and we'll talk about the video later on. But I want to start with just what you're doing now, and it's not exactly a boring job. It sounds like to me. I mean, it's pretty cool. You're working for Nike. And you're the North American brand manager. So what does that entail? What kind of work do you do with Nike?
Yeah, man. I am essentially for me, I am living my absolute dream job. I couldn't draft it up any more perfect than it is. I'm the North America brand manager for Nike football, based here out of Portland, Oregon, where Nike's headquarters is. And I get to help oversee and drive our brand marketing across North America for the United States' most popular sport in American football. So it's an absolute dream job for me as a guy who's a marketer. I'm into storytelling, which is all about what brand marketing really is, and I've been a sneakerhead and a sports obsessed guy for as long as I can remember. And so it sort of melds all of those opportunities into one. And like I said, man, it's a dream job. I sort of have to pinch myself on a regular basis.
I can relate. Let's just say that because 16 and a half years at ESPN, and I know ESPN's on the complete other side of the country, but every time somebody would come and visit us in Bristol, I would show them the campus. I'd take them around and get them on, different shows and all that when I was a talent producer there. And they'd always say, this reminds me so much of the Nike campus, which is in Portland, like you said. And it's so I can completely relate to that. Is that campus everything that everybody says it is?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, we often refer to it as like a Disneyland for sports obsessed people, and when I've seen the Sports Center commercials, that are always involving the professional athletes, I have those moments all the time. You'll be walking through a Nike campus and, professional athletes just walk by, and we treat them like any other employee. And it's like, it's a really cool experience. So plenty of gyms, plenty of games, intramurals. We call it campus. I mean, that just rolls off my tongue. Most people would refer to it as an office.
As we did
building.
Too.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, there you go. Then and it's really treated like a college campus. So you're riding your bike from building to building. It's kind of sprawled out. There's people in backpacks and sneakers everywhere, and all the opportunities you would want to engage with sports history, sneaker history, and any kind of sport you would want to play.
Love it. Well, you mentioned sports. It's been a part of you forever, you said. So let's go back before we get into the sort of nuts and bolts of all that you've been through, basically from the time you were a teenager. Before that time, growing up, what was life like as Jordan Rodgers, the young kid, typical kid, childhood like for you? Sports fan, sports a big part of it. What was that like?
Yeah. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas. Middle-class family, had amazing parents who raised me in the church, but also just with every opportunity we could want. And I don't know, sports was just a part of my life from a very early age. I mean, I can just remember wanting to play and go outside, and I was obsessed with basketball, football, soccer, baseball, golf. I got into golf at a pretty early age, and I just wanted to play it all. And so at the time, my name is obviously Jordan. The greatest basketball player of all time was coming of age when I was growing up. And so Michael Jordan burst onto the scene right in the middle of my childhood. And it was spectacular to be able to watch that career and that journey. There's also another guy by the name of Bo Jackson, who many of us are familiar with. And the campaign Bo Knows is just absolutely resonated with me. And I think a bunch of kids at the time, it was like, Bo knows football, Bo knows baseball, Bo knows basketball, Bo knows golf, surfing, tennis, whatever was the joke. But I certainly related to that and wanted to be a part of that.
We're talking to Jordan Rogers here. He is Nike's North American brand manager. You can see him in an I Am Second video that we'll talk about in a little bit. But his story, much more than that. And you mentioned faith as a child. Jordan grew up in the church. What did that look like before the sort of downfall started to happen for you with your faith?
It was a part of my childhood. So I have just a unique background. So my grandfather was a Southern Baptist preacher out of Mississippi, Vicksburg, Mississippi. And so I had that. And then my father was in the professional realm, but after his undergrad, he went on to Dallas Theological Seminary and got a theology degree.
Okay.
And so he was grounded in the faith, really strong, as was my mother and the family. And so I just grew up as a part of it. So I think faith was there from an early age. And my parents were good about it. I mean, my dad wasn't like, declare faith at any time. I deliberately and specifically remember him talking about, he wanted to wait till that was something that we, were declaring for ourselves, my sister and I. I remember being aware of the concept of God and just prayer life and all that. Of course, it certainly takes on a deeper and more stronger and tangible meaning later in life, but that certainly was there as a kid.
And then let's go to 15 years old. And,
Sure.
the video depicts that first time that you ever tried drugs. So
Yep.
let's go to that moment when you're sort of living a regular kid childhood, whatever you want to call it. And then all of a sudden you start going downhill and it starts at
Yep.
that moment. Take us there.
So I would probably back up and just say that I think, I used to think I was very unique. I was a pretty happy-go-lucky kid and whatnot, and then entered into adolescence, 13, 14, really starting to struggle, and you sort of want to find your own identity, right? So, okay, we go to church every Sunday. Well, why? I want to sleep in. I'm tired. I don't want to go to church on Sunday. I don't want to go to church on a Wednesday night. None of my friends have to do that. I want to develop my own identity, and you just have that normal rebellion and independence that I think is just part of adolescence. And unfortunately for me, there was kind of a bad sort of turn of events. So there was that rebellion that started to happen. There was also then, as you get into the large school districts like I was, like your sporting life starts to become to a serious point where you have to kind of make a decision, like, are you going to go all in on some of these? Or are you not? And so I showed promise in golf, and I was obsessed with basketball by this point. And so I dropped the golf thing because that's certainly not exciting when you're 13 years old. You know what I mean?
Of course not. Yes.
Hey man, I wanted to be balling. So I went for basketball, but I and then tried out for the teams, but I couldn't make it. And there's a number of reasons there. Like I did, practice was a concept that sort of missed me. I think I felt like Allen Iverson, like we're talking about practice here,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And so I didn't have the brain to be able to develop those kinds of things yet. Like, oh, okay, just work harder and come back next year. Well, I came back next year, didn't make it again at 14. So that was sort of perhaps for me, a downfall if we're talking about sports. And so those things are now removed. And I have this kind of vacuum in my life that had been there for so long. You add that to some teenage angst, some rebellion, some adolescence, and we have a cocktail ripe for other things to seep in. So that was when I started, trying drugs and alcohol. And certainly you have all of that kind of angst going on. I have a void in my life in a number of ways. And hey, drugs and alcohol sort of started to fill that void, and it started to be great. At least for me, I think one of the things that's most important that I try to tell people now these days, and we can get into this more, but is, everybody sits there and tells you like, oh, you if you smoke weed, you're going to end up homeless, tomorrow, or, whatever. And that's just not the case. Or, you drink today and you're going to end up a wino bum tomorrow, and they teach you this sort of in health class when you're a kid. And you do that once and you realize, hey, actually, no, I felt like I had a good time, and no, I didn't end up homeless. So, hey, what else are they lying to me about? And so that's a flawed adolescence, view of the world and of adults, but I think it's a common one. And so anyway, all that led up to the first time I tried heroin, which is where we pick up in that film at 15 years old. And that was, hey, I was trying all kinds of different things at that point. I was, hurting and partying really. And somebody had a powdery substance and they laid it out. And when they snorted it, it looked like they had a good feeling. So I tried it, and it certainly was a good feeling, in the first time early. And so that started a train of destruction and a chain of events that happened for the next several years, which we kind of unpack in the film.
15 years old. I'm trying to picture myself at 15. I was 10th grade probably. Yep. And I don't think I was even aware that this type of stuff was happening. And I'm sure it did. I was a kid in the late 80s, early 90s, at this age.
Yep.
So take me into how this comes about. Are you just hanging with friends and are like, hey, dude, check this out?
Yeah.
Is that kind of just how it happens? I mean, because you're raised in a way where, I guess I wonder how it even gets to the point where you would even try it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I do. So this was a unique time in the 90s where it made all kinds of news coverage at the time. So I was down in Texas. That's close to Mexico. And there was a new wave of sort of snortable powder heroin that was making its way across the border. We have since, in the last 20 years, it's become just an epidemic in the country and a national health crisis. But this was sort of some of the early stages of it. And so when this was being introduced in a powdered form, it appeared less threatening, right? Because there's this big, stigma of heroin. Oh, you shoot that's junkies and needles and blood and all that. And, snorting, that's sort of more akin to the reputation of something like, cocaine. It's not quite as bad, and it's a party drug and that kind of stuff. And so, being a 15-year-old kid in the suburbs, I don't know, I think normal kids are trying, alcohol at certain points. I was certainly way early on this train.
Yeah.
And I think another downfall was several of my friends, we all had older brothers. I didn't, but all my kind of crew had older brothers who were 3 years older. So we got introduced to things
right
on an accelerated timeline. And then I was hanging out with some of the older kids too, just naturally. And so that's where some of this stuff, a bad combination of older kids plus, some of the kids who were into the worst stuff. That's a bad combo for a young, impressionable teen.
Describe what life was like when you're in the midst of this, say 15, 16 years old for you. Is this a hidden thing that nobody really knows about, your parents and your family don't know about, or does it get exposed and yet you're still kind of living in that world?
It was hidden for a couple of years. It's hard to hide though before it starts to become an issue. And my parent, and I look back, I was, terribly resentful at the time. My parents, I was always getting in trouble. I was getting busted. I would be the ones getting, caught or grounded or, hounded. And, that's because my parents were involved and they were aware and they were awake and they grew up in the, 60s and 70s. So they weren't a fool about some stuff. Yeah. And so it was hidden. Yeah. I would call it, first it's Friday night and you go to parties and you do this kind of stuff. And then it's Saturday nights and then it's, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then it sort of starts to spiral.
So take me to the moment when you're first confronted about it as a 16-year-old or 17-year-old or whatever age you were when it happens, and kind of how your response was. What was, was it, I'm trying to put myself into a parent's shoes if that's my kid, and just how I would react. Would I panic? Would I get angry? Would I start weeping? Would I come alongside and love them and just work through? What was that like?
It was all of that.
Yeah.
Look, man, I've got a son now who's just over 1, and I'm already panic. Really, I just pray for him every night, basically every morning. that he is not afflicted with addiction and that he would be protected from that. But, I think it came in waves, right? So I got in a lot of trouble. I got in trouble with the law early. I would, for different things, I would get busted here and there, drinking and things like that, getting busted at parties. So these things started to happen. I was getting in trouble at school. I was, falling asleep in class. I was, late to this. I was skipping that. So the signs started to come up quite a bit. And so we went on a family vacation my senior year of high school, a week before my senior year. And I had already been kind of, I was skating on really thin ice. And I think my parents behind the scenes were talking about actually sending me to treatment for the first time. It was bad by the time I was 17. And we look back now, it was quite foolish. My parents and I are both not sure why we wanted to go to Cancun as a family when I was dealing with addiction.
Yeah, you can
I don't know why they
laugh now,
thought
right?
it. Yeah, we laugh about it now. I don't know. Cheap flights are available. I can't remember. They laugh about it. I mean, they don't really laugh, but
Sure.
So we go down there, of course, terrible combination. I go out, I get alcohol poisoning, and basically, just get into a whole lot of trouble, get kicked out of places. I don't remember a lot of it. And I was carried by a cab driver in Mexico. They basically dropped me at the front door of this hotel at whatever, 3:00 in the morning. And my parents come to find me and are just panicked. My blood alcohol level was, I think a 0.3, which is, really, 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 really bad. 0.4. Death is pretty close to that. And so they basically, waited up all night with me, debating on taking me to a hospital in Mexico. And were really just sitting over me, making sure I wasn't stopped breathing. And that is just an unimaginable situation for a parent to be in. And that is even more sobering to me today as a parent. But I think that basically pushed them over the edge, and they said, okay, we need to send him to treatment. I think they wanted to give me one more chance. And a week into school, I skipped class and got busted somehow and failed a drug test for heroin. And it was time for me to go. So they confronted me, had an intervention, and basically sent me off to my first rehab a week into my senior year of high school.
I never have been into a rehab situation of anything like that. My dad has, for sure. Different situation, obviously, different dynamic. He was, in his 30s and 40s and 50s, and you're, 16, 17 years old. But take me into going into treatment for the first time and being, you're a high school kid. You're supposed to be enjoying your senior year of high school.
Gosh.
And you're in a rehab center. So take us to that.
I think the idea was to get me as far away from my city as possible. And so my parents succeeded in finding a wilderness treatment center in the middle of Montana. So I was
culture shock.
Culture shock like no other. I am a 17-year-old punk like city kid with like bleach blonde hair and earrings and piercings and whatever. And to that point, I think my feet would get sore walking around the mall, too much. And they sent me to the freaking mountains,
Wow.
where we were there for 60 days. We did a 21-day wilderness trip near the Yellowstone National Park in Montana, which I look back now, it was spectacular and amazing. But, for the 17-year-old kid, like I was ready to jump off a cliff.
Right.
And so, man, I was out there. It was tough. Like you said, I wanted to be back home with my friends. I wanted to be partying. I wanted to do so many other things other than be in rehab, at 17, but that's where I had landed.
So you get back, we're talking to Jordan Rogers here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You get back, Jordan, and it's, you sort of fall back into that same old, right, of addiction.
Yep.
For you, what were some of the worst things that you saw in the midst of this?
There's a lot of bad things in that world. So, if you fast forward a few years, like I went in and out of a few more treatment centers and detoxes and all kinds of things. And started to get into worse drug use and started to get into needles and all that. So that stuff was pretty tough. I told this story in some degree to the I Am Second team, but I remember calling several of my acquaintances who I used to get high with to try to go downtown to score, to go get some heroin, and all of them had an excuse. They told me, one of them, a couple of them needed to work late, a couple of them had a prior commitment, they needed to do something, they didn't have a car, whatever. So I eventually caught a cab downtown, and I get there, it was snowing this night. It was in the winter, and I'm standing outside waiting on a dealer, and I look over and there's this car full of guys waiting as well. And I go over there and knock on the door. Surely every one of those guys who I'd called to try to go downtown had all given me an excuse and basically told me something else. And they were standing there sitting there waiting on the dealer too. And basically one of the guys, pulled me aside afterwards. I'm like, dude, what the heck? What are you guys doing? And one of them's like, look, man, we don't want to hang out with you anymore. We're afraid you're going to die and we're going to have to, take you to the hospital or something. And so that's a challenging thing to hear from other heroin addicts, that they don't want to hang out with you because they're afraid you're going to die. So that's not good. I don't know, man. You see a lot of darkness in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And so, just for me, one of the things that just stuck with me for a long time is when I eventually got incarcerated and I was in a jail down near Austin, Texas. I had a jail cell next to a kid who was 18, who had gone to a party with his girlfriend, like 18-year-olds do, and had driven away and was speeding in his car. He was driving drunk and missed a turn, tried to turn too late, and he slammed his car into a tree and killed that girl at 18 years old. He was in there for 25 years. Not going to be eligible for parole until he was, 43 years old. And that just stuck with me, man. You can make such a decision just being young and dumb, and it can affect your entire life. And so that was especially sobering for me.
You mentioned that moment when you were with the other crew and they were like, we don't want to be around you because, you're a mess. You're even bigger of a mess than we are. But for you, how close do you think you were at one point before or after you were incarcerated to death? What was the low point there of wondering if you were even going to live anymore?
I got several stories, but the older I get,
we're a podcast. Go right ahead.
I know. Hey, the older I get and the wiser I get, the more I realize how close to death I was.
Wow.
It just freaks me out, man. And I don't understand. And I think the longer that I've had friends and acquaintances and people that I know pass away from the same thing, and the more funerals that I went to, I started to understand how close I was. So, I mentioned that episode of just having crazy alcohol poisoning. That happened several times. And when you start to look at the blood alcohol concentration, you see that there's a threshold for what should be death. And I certainly was against that several times. I remember, there's a couple of times where, like I said, there's that period of time where you're really trying anything and everything you can when you're just trying to get high. And so I'd taken horse tranquilizers one time, and I had an out of body experience where I just couldn't move, and that was terrible. But then certainly just with the needle use, I was alone in a, motel bathroom, locked up in a pink motel, shooting heroin and cocaine and just going up and down and up and down and up and down by myself. And so, there was no one around to know if I was going to be okay. Wasn't eating for multiple days at a time. I was subsisting on, a Coca-Cola and 2 donuts for 99 cents from 7-Eleven, smoking a couple packs of cigarettes a day, shooting heroin and cocaine. I don't know how you can really survive on that. I don't eat for 3 hours these days, and I turn into an ornery mess,
Right.
So,
yeah.
Anyway.
You say you describe the moment when you're in a hotel room and you're just shooting yourself up and living on Dunkin' Donuts, not Dunkin' Donuts, 7-Eleven donuts and
Yep,
soda, and just that seems like rock bottom to me. Like that's got to be
absolutely.
rock bottom. And I remember moments with my own dad, like that's got to be the moment, right? That's got to be the moment. Where are you as far as when you reach what the addict world likes to say is rock bottom? When does that
Yeah,
happen for you?
I'll offer you a couple moments. One, I was given the opportunity to go to treatment. I was caught up in the justice system early on, shortly after my 18th birthday, and that web, once you get your tentacles in you there, it's very hard to break away. And so I was given the ability to go to treatment out in California. I stayed clean for a while. I'd come back. So I had to go to a court date. I had since relapsed and had been using. I was trying methadone programs. I had gone in and out of detox, all kinds of things. And my parents gave me a ride down to court. I needed to beg the judge to let me go to rehab again, or they were going to lock me up and send me to a, state rehab, and I had to go to jail for a little while. And so I had, a syringe is 100 units, and I had passed out. I'd been up for 3 days, and so I drew up 98 units of, black tar heroin right before I went into this court date, and was basically like, I'm either going to die, or when I get locked up, I won't at least know where I am for several days, And so I did that, and that certainly would be very close to death. And that is a rock bottom moment, getting locked up and sort of coming out of that haze after a few days of sleeping and waking up and realizing there I was. So those are there, but honestly, man, it's a really funny one. It's not. It doesn't have to do with that. So they gave me the opportunity to go to a court-ordered treatment center. It was pretty nice. It wasn't the worst. I had to wait in jail. I got to that one. I was there for several weeks, and I ended up getting kicked out. So I was acting a fool. I was stone cold sober at this time, but I was just crazy, And they say, you take the alcohol away from a drunk horse thief, and you have a sober horse thief, so you still have a horse thief. I was still pretty crazy. And so at this point, they kicked me out. They said, hey, Jordan, we're actually going to discharge you early. And I'm like, oh, great, thank you. You guys have figured out that I'm too smart for this place and I need to get out of here, and thank you. And they're like, no, actually, there's an officer waiting for you in the lobby. He's here to arrest you. They put the handcuffs on me and they take me back to this county jail, and I'm in a holding cell. And at this point, and I talk about this in the film, I am facing several years in prison, 5 to 20 to be exact. And I had been given several chances. I had blown a lot of them, and I was sitting there, and two guys were arguing over a toilet paper roll. And one of them wanted to use it for its intended purpose, and the other was using it for a pillow to lay in the concrete jail cell. And man, I can't tell you what, I had been in way worse places than that. I had seen way worse things. But at that moment, I just thought, I absolutely deserve to be here, but I do not belong here. This is not what I was made for. God, if you are out there, whoever you are and whatever you are, I need help, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get there. And that was a rock bottom moment for me. And I didn't create the universe, he did. So I think at that point I sort of met God on his terms. And really what that meant, I think, was just like, okay, I surrendered. And I was like, all right, God, I know my life has to change dramatically. And if you are who you say you are, I need help. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get that and to try something different, because something's got to change.
How hard was recovery for you as you make that next step into doing something different? How hard was that for you?
Man, I'll be honest, early recovery is hard. It was, I spent, in total 13 months incarcerated. So I feel in hindsight, and even early on, I knew that I was pretty privileged to have that. I don't know that I was capable where I was at the time to be let out into the free world and to just do the right thing. I certainly hadn't proven the ability to do that up to that point. So I feel really privileged that I was sort of locked up in a controlled environment. Not that it was a great environment, but I was sort of saved from myself for a little while. So getting out from there, though, like you said earlier, part of that is going to a halfway house. And I went to the Salvation Army on Harry Hines Boulevard in Dallas, Texas, which is, one of the shadiest streets in the city. So you're not set up for a great amount of success there. So that wasn't easy. And then it's just hard, you're acclimating to an entirely new life and an entirely just new construct of the world. For many people, it talks about, you feel like a fish out of water, and if you've seen what a fish looks like when you pull them out of water, I mean, that's kind of how you feel. So it was challenging. I'm not going to lie. And I think that that's something that is good for people to hear as they're entering recovery. The rest of the world is going to tell you, hey, if you just stop doing drugs, everything is going to be fine. If you just stop drinking, you will be great. And that is not reality. And that's not a truth. And that's not what I think a lot of people experience. So I wrote a piece for I Am Second talking about that. But that's a reality that we face. And so I think it's important for people to hear that. And that's certainly my experience. It was challenging.
So not just trying to get back to a sense of normalcy, as you just mentioned, and trying to acclimate to society, as you will, but then when you start walking as a follower of Jesus Christ and what that looks like for you, how is that starting to take shape? Just because I can just imagine you're just trying to be normal and sober and just kind of acclimate yourself to society. And yet you're trying to also, or you're having this faith element in your life in terms of following Christ. What's that look like for you during this time?
You're absolutely right. Look, you're just trying to at a minimum level, you were trying not to kill yourself.
It's literally day to day, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is absolutely that.
Yeah.
It's minute to minute, hour to hour. So you're trying not to do a substance that will kill you. You're trying not to go back to jail. You're trying to just kind of put one foot in front of the other. So it gets really simple, I think, in that walk of faith. So I'll be honest, I was introduced to the 12-step program. So I was kind of, I didn't feel like I could fit in I would go to churches, and I think it was really challenging early on because, say you go to a Bible study group, if you take your average Bible study group that I may go to today, guys are struggling with, I don't know, things that are real struggles, but, hey, I'm cursing too much, or I have pride, or, a lust issue here, or, I've got some anger I'm really struggling with, or I snapped at my boss, or whatever. And you're like, dude, I'm sitting there, whatever, just trying not to stick a needle in my arm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? On probation, facing, prison time. And I'm like, wow, those seem like very big quality problems. So there wasn't a lot of things I felt like I could relate to. Now, that's not to say that I couldn't have or whatever. That was just sort of my own insecurity at times. And I think oftentimes people early in recovery have those same insecurities. So you take a place, where there's a lot of other people in recovery, or places, where people are dealing with some of those same issues, and it was easier. And there it was sort of started to get quite simple. I'm just trying to pray, I'm trying to ask God to help me do the right thing. I'm trying to have Him show me which way to go, and I'm trying to practice some of His principles in my daily life. And so, honestly, the 12-step program, I frankly call Christianity for dummies. There is a whole process in there about admitting, which follows a whole lot of what we do in, Christianity. Hey, admitting I'm a sinner, admitting I'm a drug addict or an alcoholic, and then I'm struggling, and then I'm not enough on my own. Asking for forgiveness, turning to say, hey, I'm willing to turn my life over to God, to take inventory and to go, hey, I was wrong here, to confess. We have that, to then go out and make amends, ask forgiveness of people who I've harmed, people I've stolen from, people I've wronged, and then to go out and make fishers of men. And so that process didn't quite look the same that it does now, but all those tenets were in place, and I started to build that foundation slowly over several years.
So at some point here, it starts to work. You start to stay sober. You end up in college. You end up meeting the woman that you would get married to. Take us just through that time frame. Give us a snapshot not only of what's going on, but where you are in your life as far as what age you are and how things are going here as you become more grounded in your faith and sobriety starts to kick in really well here.
Yeah. Early on, got out, started to get a part-time job, was doing okay in that, joined, got into community college, went to a couple of classes, was able to pass those. Then I enrolled, full-time into community college, took 12 hours. That went over okay. Did another semester. That was going okay. Working, I really got into working out and physical fitness and nutrition. I certainly started working out quite a bit when I was locked up. You can't do much else. So that was good. And then I carried that into the world, and I just knew that I was going to need all the help I could get. So I became a personal trainer, and that was really interesting and really cool, and where God really started to show me some of the crazy power that he has in turning a life around, where here I am, let's call it, 2 years sober, and people are coming to me asking for tips and to help guide them in health and wellness, and not, 730 days prior, I was sticking a needle in my arm, on death's doorstep.
Cool.
So yeah, that was really cool to be able to do that. Eventually went to SMU, got to do a study abroad program, man. That was amazing. And through this, I was starting to participate in recovery. I talk about in the I Am Second film, I was sort of ready to give up at a couple of points. I hit some stumbling blocks very early on, and I had a guy who just, I believe, was just straight God sent, and just walked up to me and was like, hey, do we need to talk? I'm going to take you under my wing, and I'm going to take you through this process, and I'm going to guide you through recovery. And that was incredibly amazing and influential for a guy to just disciple me through that process into recovery. And then he just showed me what it was like to do the same thing for others, and to just serve others, to mentor young guys, and to be that kind of forward and direct. I think you'll find this in the church, but you certainly find this in places in recovery where there's this thought that like, guys who are serious or, whatever, really looking for that discipleship, they'll go approach someone, when you're ready, you'll kind of go, hey, will you help me? And really, we should go and try to take on, young guys, to mentor them and be proactive about that. And so that was awesome and influential for me. So very early on, I started, helping and serving other young men through this process, and have kept that up to this day. So that is certainly building that servant heart, that servant attitude, working out my faith, in the physical realm really helped me. So I'm getting off track, but
it's okay.
Basically, eventually, got back out into the working world, found this dream job I wanted to have at Nike, and spent several years chasing that and doing a lot of, humbling work to try to put myself in a position to get that, and was able to ultimately reach that dream job that I was wanting several years ago, and have kind of worked my way up there professionally.
What about relationship and how you find your wife, and how you get to the point where you feel like you can be a husband, get to the point of marriage, and you can actually, you're actually in a place of sobriety and a good place in your life where you can actually like share your life with someone else.
Look, man, like I said, I alluded to some stuff earlier. Being a young man, getting into recovery, I made a lot of mistakes, and just in the dating world, I was young and immature, and didn't really act right for several years, and I had to work that out, and go through a lot of pain, a lot of challenges, and try to work that out with the Lord, and through a lot of other guys, and ultimately was good friends with my now wife at the time, and we had been in the same circle for a long time, and I think I was kind of looking in all these places for comfort or a partner, and looking to date in all these different places. And I think what was really cool to me is God kind of showed me like my dream girl was right under my nose this whole time. And so we kind of both had gone through a lot of crazy relationship stuff prior. We both found ourselves in a position where we were single and really needing to just do a lot of work on ourselves and whatnot. And so we had been able to do some of that, and then we're able to kind of come together and start a relationship. And it was just kind of amazing. So we were both in a place also that we were really seeking to grow spiritually at that time. And so we started going with some friends out to attend a church, the Village Church out in Highland Village.
Matt Chandler's church.
Matt Chandler's church, indeed.
Sure.
And we would drive a long way to go hear some really cool messages, and to have some thought-provoking sermons, and to kind of wrestle out that faith with several of our other friends who had been in recovery. And we were all, mixed up jokers and sinners, and did not have our stuff together in any kind of way, but we were welcomed in that place, and we were able to kind of wrestle out a lot of intellectual topics that we were struggling with, had questions and all that, and it was just an awesome place to be able to wrestle through that. And so we really grew exponentially together, ourselves and with some friends, into a serious relationship with the Lord.
We're talking to Jordan Rogers here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. A couple more questions left with Jordan, and we do appreciate you being so open and transparent in sharing your story with us, Jordan. And, I was thinking many people often, believers, many of the people that are listening to this podcast, I'm sure, including myself, when I first became a Christian, I thought, man, things are going to be going great. Things are going to get, blue skies and wonderful flowers, and everything's just going to go wonderful. And I shake my head now when I say that, even knowing that that's just not the case. Just because you become a believer in Christ, yes, there's a joy, there's a peace, there's an eternal promise, but life still stinks and gets messy sometimes. And so I know for you, yes, you beat addiction. Yes, you're getting, sort of that dream job scenario. You find your wife, you're sober, but
Yep.
still life is presenting its challenges for you. So take us through those moments post-marriage, I guess, and the challenges that you guys faced as a couple.
Yeah. So your last question too was about, growing into being a husband and all that. I would just say, as we talk about challenge, I think early on in my wife and I's relationship, as we were wrestling out a lot of this stuff, and I was dealing with, just leftover baggage from several years of not being the most, upstanding, godly man that I wanted to be. We had some early challenges to wrestle through in engagement and then early in our marriage. And so having gone through a lot of those difficulties early on, and being open and honest and asking for forgiveness and wrestling through stuff with the Lord, I think it put us in a really good position to have a solid foundation to build a long relationship on. So when we wanted to start a family a few years into marriage, I think we said, hey, okay, let's start trying to get pregnant. And we were able to get pregnant early on, pretty easy, but we had a miscarriage early on, and so we did kind of the classic thing where we did the big baby announcement, and we had a party at, I don't know, 6 weeks. 6 weeks. So she was 6 weeks along, and told all our friends and family, and then of course we go through that loss a couple weeks later, and that was hard. But as anybody who's been through miscarriage learns, that there's a lot of people who've gone through it. I think 25% of pregnancies can end in miscarriage. Mm-hmm. And so you start to meet other people who've been through those things. And so that was okay. It was hard, but we got through it. And then we got pregnant again, had a second miscarriage. And that was harder. And it was like, hey, okay, this isn't out of the ordinary. You start to meet a few more people who've had a second miscarriage. We're like, okay. And then we had a third miscarriage. And that was even more challenging, I think. That hurt and was hard. And I think we had some other stuff going on in life. My wife had a cat who she had had for 12 years. And I think after the third one, 2 weeks later, we had to put the cat down, So, I mean, dude, when it rains, it pours. So
yeah, right. On
that third one too, there's just a process where you have to go in, and she had to have surgery to, as a part of the process. Sometimes they didn't necessarily, do it right. She started bleeding internally 2 days later, and she had to go back into surgery again, so there was just all this struggle through that. And then lastly, okay, we're obviously burnt at this point. We go for a fourth time. We're going to try, this, what we think maybe one last time. And we were actually, she had come with me to Chicago for an event a couple of years back. And we're in Chicago, and we're having a pretty good time, but she started having some pain again. And, we went to the emergency room at 1:00 in the morning, and she was basically bleeding internally and had an ectopic pregnancy rupture. And so we lost yet another one.
Wow.
And,
I can't imagine. I just can't imagine, especially what you've went through. You just described everything you went through, and then this.
Oh, yeah. So I just think, to be honest, man, that moment, it was, so I told you, we got burned the first time. We made the announcement to everyone, and anyone who's gone through this, struggles, you want to tell everyone early, and then you don't want to tell anyone, and then you want to tell a few people, and then you want to wait. And so, at this point we had waited, and we hadn't really told anyone. And so it was, it was really hard. I basically had to wait till 6:00 in the morning on Sunday. She had to go into surgery and have one of her tubes removed and all this. And so, being, alone in this city at 6:00 in the morning on a rainy Sunday morning, going through this again was the loneliest, darkest place of my life, in this hospital. And I, like I said, I've been through quite a bit, but this was certainly what I feel like was the lowest point of my life. And so, what was that doing to our faith, man? It was testing it. I think but it was also bringing me to a place where, if it goes full circle, and you might think what the other lowest point of my life was, it was kind of a surrender moment, where we're on our knees at that point, just going, Lord, what are you wanting to do with us here? What is your will for our life? Do you want us to have children? Do you want us to not? Do you want us to adopt? Do you want us to, is our role to take on young men and women in recovery? And that's our paternal, position in life. Is that what we get to do? So we were just struggling and really just asking, the Lord. And we went back and forth. I got to a point where I had friends who were praying for me because we could not utter the words again. Oh, Lord, please give us a child. We just couldn't even say those words because we had just felt like we had been burned, and had not had that. But it ultimately came full circle, and we just got into utter reliance upon Him.
And there's good news, though.
There is
You
good
mentioned
news. Yeah.
earlier. You mentioned earlier in
Yeah.
the interview that you think
Yes.
about your son. So tell us
Yes.
about the moment when your
Yeah.
son arrives.
We didn't have any definitive answer as to why this was happening. No one could really tell us, and there wasn't anything. So from an optimist point of view, you said, okay, well, there's nothing clear and definitive that's been said on why we couldn't. So all right, we're going to try this one last time. I think it took us longer to get to that point, and we just said, okay, God, let's go through with this and let's just see. And my wife got pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
and 6 weeks went along, and it was okay. 8 weeks went along, we were okay. 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 4 months, 5, 6, 7, and we were very hesitant. We did not want to let our hearts get too happy or joyous, but we got a sonogram at a certain point. We found out it was going to be a boy, and it was pretty cool. So we bought our first townhome. We bought a townhome in January. We had that sonogram. We opened it up there. We found out it was going to be a boy. We thought, oh my gosh, this is the most prayed for baby in all of Dallas, Texas. We had so many people rally around us, pray for us, be there with us, go through with the challenges, come to the hospital, serve us. So many people out there. And in February, I get a job offer for a promotion and to come up to world headquarters and to come take a new role with the company. And here we are. We were sort of looking at each other. We kind of thought we had all life ready to go. Here we were going to be happily ever after here in Dallas with all of our family, all of our friends. And we had a certain number of parameters we needed, that, okay, all right, God, if you really want us to go to Portland, these 3 things need to happen. Bam, bam, bam. They all lined up. He was like, you're going. So we're like, okay, here we go. So we land in Portland when my wife's 7 months pregnant, me starting a new job, sold a house, bought a new house here. Very fortunate to go through with that. And then we got basically a 2-month countdown, and baby boy arrived here in July of last year, and it was just absolutely amazing, man.
Yeah.
Incredible, as you know.
I didn't ask you about this, but I just thought about just kind of tying a bow on the whole story here. How's the relationship with your parents now? How's everything going there?
Oh man, spectacular. My parents are amazing, and in
Good.
fact, I since having a son a year ago, you just start to understand things so differently, as you know.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
And you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, maybe my parents were right, or I understand why they did this, or man, I understand why they said that. And man, I sat my parents down just not too long ago, and I just said, look, I'm just hoping that I can do okay for my son and just be there, and him to know that I love him, and for him to know that I just want what's best for him, and I want to sacrifice for him, and I'll give him anything in the world. And I knew that from my parents. I knew that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I never doubted that they loved me. I never doubted that they wanted what was best for me. And so I reassured them of that recently. And hey, they come up here to Oregon. They've been up here a couple of times. We go down there. I think they are upset with us a little bit for moving all the way up here just as soon as they got their grandbaby from us. But the relationship is great. And in fact, oftentimes in recovery, drug addicts and alcoholics are not often the most willing, but they usually have family members who are asking questions and whatnot. And I've gotten to connect with so many people on that. I'll connect them with my parents even and just go, hey, I could tell you what my experience was, but I know it was even more challenging for my family, and they could offer you some wisdom and guidance on that. So my parents have been great. We have a great relationship in a way, in a unique place to serve people.
Let's wrap it up with this, Jordan. It's a question I ask to all of our guests here on the podcast, and I'm just curious for you with where you've been and where you are now, and what seems to be in a really great place where you are right now. What has the Lord been teaching you through all this right now? What have you been learning from him?
I hear you asking this on the podcast, so I knew this was going to come. Yeah, this is great. And to be honest, man, in fatherhood, if God is our father, and he is, and if he loves us like a father, I have started to understand his love for us in a totally new, radical way that I think was a little bit of lip service before. I think we're constantly like, oh yeah, God loves us, and I believe that, and I know he has a lot of grace, but you also feel like he may be, in our worst days, like he's kind of an annoyed father, okay, you're bothering me, oh, you're screwing up again, or this or that, and man, if he loves us, a tenth of how I love my son, it is absolutely amazing. A couple months back, my son was starting to walk, and he would literally take 2 steps and fall on his face, and I would be so overjoyed. And the words came out of my mouth, "Good job, bud. Way to go. That's amazing. Oh my gosh, you took 2 steps." And you just think about it, it's a figure of speech for us, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, or whatever. And so when we take any 2 steps forward, if God is that excited for us as a father figure, that is amazing.
Yeah.
Incredible. And that's what I'm starting to learn right now in fatherhood.
That's great. He is Jordan Rogers, Nike's North American brand manager. But as I've said a couple times on this podcast, he's much more than that. You can reach him at Jordan Rogers 26 on Twitter, and go to iamsecond.com and check out his film. It's really powerfully and beautifully well done. And Jordan, listen, I know this has gone a fairly long time here on this podcast. We probably could have gone another hour with all the stories you have, but I really just appreciate you being open, transparent, and being vulnerable enough to understand that your story can impact and really help a lot of people. So thank you for sharing it, and thank you for being on the Sports Spectrum podcast.
It's my pleasure, man. Keep up the good work. I love it, and I love what you're doing.
And we do thank Jordan Rogers, Nike's North American brand manager, for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. What a story. And I really do hope that as you listen to Jordan's journey from really brokenness to redeemed, that it provides some encouragement for you in your own walk, whether it's, something not as drastic or big as what Jordan went through, or maybe it's even bigger. Maybe you have a family member that is struggling with addiction, and you can relate to what Jordan was going through, or maybe what Jordan's parents were going through, or his brothers and sisters were going through. So I just pray that you use Jordan's story in a way that can encourage others. So please share this podcast with others. Let them know if you liked what you heard. And always you can reach us. So on Twitter, just go to sports_spectrum, at sports_spectrum. You can reach me at Jason Romano. Let us know what you think of the podcast. We'd love to hear from you. You can also email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. And what we really would love to see you do is leave a review on iTunes. So you go to the Apple Podcasts app, you search Sports Spectrum, it'll come up and it'll ask you in the area where the podcast shows you to just leave a review. So you can click like a 5-star review, which would be awesome if you like the podcast. So click the 5-star review and then write a little blurb about the podcast, why you like it, what's been your favorite episode, what kind of guests you would like to see in the future. So we'd love to hear from you. Leave a review on iTunes, and we do appreciate you listening to the podcast and being a consumer of Sports Spectrum. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us and listening to this podcast, and we will see you next time right here at Sports Spectrum.